I want to thank CCI Action and all of you for coming out here today. Sounds like there's a lot of energy in this room, yes? Well, good. It's my great honor to be here with all of you and to talk about the story that we share together, the story of us, the story of all of us together. My name is Martin O'Malley. I come from Maryland. I'm the former mayor of Baltimore, the former governor of Maryland. Baltimore in the house? Yeah? All right, man. And in the opening remarks are what, like 5 to 7 minutes, just sort of framing things? 4. Okay, perfect. So now we only have 3 more minutes to go. Look, I think the genius of our nation is that in every generation we take actions to include more of our people more fully in the economic, the social, and the political life of our nation. That's what makes this the land of opportunity. That's what allows us to be able to give our children a future that's more secure and more prosperous. My background, unlike my other 2 fine colleagues who are running for your party's nomination, is not that of a senator or as a cabinet member, but as an executive primarily. And I have been at the forefront of some of the toughest issues of facing justice and injustice and race in America. I was mayor of Baltimore. I ran in 1999, not because our city was doing well, but because we had allowed ourselves to become the most violent and addicted city in America. And we were burying over 320, 340 young black men every year, and Black Lives Mattered. We weren't able to make our city immune to setbacks, but we were able to save a lot of lives. Cut violent crime by 40%, biggest reduction in crime of any city in America over the next 10 years. Reduced deaths from overdoses by 30% by increasing drug treatment. We doubled awards to minority and women-owned businesses during that time in the city. And then as governor, I increased by 117% the award of city contracts to African-American-owned businesses. We defended all through the recession the highest median income in America and the second highest median income in America for African-American families. So, and unlike Governor Branstad, rather than cutting public education, we increased it by 37%. And we're thereby able to address what had been a really awful inequity and disparity in the funding of public education in our state. We made our schools the #1 public schools in America 5 years in a row, according to Education Week magazine. And we also increased funding during a recession to not only to higher education. We went 5 years in a row, or rather 4 years in a row, without a penny's increase to college tuition, and we increased funding for our HBCUs by some 37% as well in those years. So my politics, my economics, my actions have been the politics, the actions, and the economics of inclusion, including more people more fully in the success of our country. That's really what it's all about. And the great Marylander, Frederick Douglass, probably summed it up best when he said that we are one, our cause is one, and we must help each other if we are to succeed. That's the truth I'm calling forward in this presidential campaign, and that's why I believe Iowa is going to surprise people on caucus night by showing that in our country, the individual citizen is still the highest office in the land. Thanks a lot. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Governor. And we're going to begin our interactive portion of the forum today. And first, you'll hear a question from Terrell Williams from Baltimore, your home city.
Good afternoon. My name is Terrell Williams, and I'm a resident of Baltimore City. I was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri, in a place called Cochran Gardens, which were 5 buildings.
Try that. There we go.
I'll start again.
We want to hear that voice, Terrell.
Good afternoon. My name is Terrell Williams. I'm a resident of Baltimore City. And I was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri, in a place called Cochran Gardens, which was comprised of 5 buildings, 25 stories high. And the elevator in my building never worked. It was so scary going through those stairwells trying to get to the 20th floor. I saw so many things in those stairwells. I saw people rolling dice. I saw fights. I saw bullying. I even saw women getting raped. A 6-year-old should not have to see that. Sometimes I would run 3 blocks down, and there was this beautiful 4-story building. Beautiful flowers, nice shiny windows, and an elevator that worked. I'd stand out there and just watch people go in and come out. None of them looked like me. The school I attended looked much like the building that I lived in. It looked like a prison. It had windows we could not see in or out of. The books were old. There was no lined paper. And from pre-K through high school, I did not experience one science lab. I said to myself, when I have kids, they will not be raised in a place where I was raised. They deserve more. So I worked hard, and I got what I think is a beautiful education. And I said, through those trials, I will dedicate my life to creating healthy communities for healthy families, and we're doing just that in Baltimore City. We are working with community leaders, with churches, and with private investors, bringing them together to leverage local, state, and federal funds to transform these distressed communities. We're also talking to CEOs of the top companies and saying to them, you must pay a living wage. We also started this organization I call a movement called Turnaround Tuesday, where our returning citizens come every Tuesday and we help them with every single thing we can to make sure that they get not only a second chance, but a third chance and a fourth chance, because we don't throw away people. We need to invest, make the kind of investments that uplift all of us together. Governor O'Malley. Yes, sir. Will you, I want to make sure I get this correct. What would you do nationally to invest in Black and brown communities that have been historically discriminated against, and will you champion the necessary public investments that target those communities?
Yes. I believe I'm the only candidate seeking either party's nomination to put forward a new agenda for America's cities. It has not been since Jimmy Carter that we had a new agenda for America's cities. As I see it, and from my experience as mayor and my experience as governor, there are 3 areas where the federal government could be hugely helpful in bringing opportunity and a higher standard of living to places in the centers of our metro economies that have been so far left behind by the recovery. What are those 3? Number 1, investments in mobility and transportation options. For 7 years, I worked to modernize our transportation funding, our gas tax, so that we can invest in mass transit opportunities through some of those parts of Baltimore that have been portrayed for decades on television shows. And as soon as we got the funding, then I was succeeded by a Republican governor, and he pulled the plug on it. But needless to say, progress kind of zigs and zags, doesn't it? So I believe that the biggest, and studies show, one of the biggest impediments to upward economic mobility is a lack of mobility itself. So we need to double our investments in transportation, including mass transit options in our cities. Secondly, poor families pay a larger percentage of their monthly living expenses going to housing, oftentimes substandard housing. We need to make a big investment, and I propose doubling our investment in workforce and affordable housing in our country. And related to those two, and consistent with being the only candidate to put forward a plan to move us to a 100% clean electric grid by 2050, I believe that we need to acknowledge the truth that our city centers are places where unemployment is highest, and also where our energy usage and wastage is highest. There is work to be done. There is retrofitting to be done. In the early days of the Obama administration, we saw what mayors could do when given these funds. So I believe that we should make cities the center, or rather the leading edge of this movement to a clean, green designed, built energy future with net zero homes, with buildings that produce more energy than they use. And I also believe that we need to double our investment in community development block grants so that mayors who know what need to be done can do the demolition and the other things that get people back to work.
Thank you, Governor. Next up, we're going to hear from Rod Adams from Minneapolis.
Okay. All right. My name is Rod Adams. I'm from Minneapolis.
Just grab it.
Just grab it.
There you go.
All right. My name is Rod Adams. I'm from Minneapolis. And for the past 6 to 7 years, I've struggled with long bouts of unemployment, and I've worked a variety of minimum wage jobs, doing all this to take care of me and my daughter. But through it all, I had hope. I had hope because I was a college student who was really close to graduating, knowing that once I graduated, I would be so much closer to achieving the elusive American dream. But once I graduated, I figured out that that American dream was just that, a dream. Sometimes I had to choose between eating food or paying my rent. In the wealthiest nation in the world, that ain't right. Okay, now the Federal Reserve has a mandate for full employment, but black communities, specifically in the Midwest, are struggling to find employment, and they haven't felt the effects of this mandate. In Minnesota, black Minnesotans, the rate of unemployment for black Minnesotans is almost 4 times as high as it is for white Minnesotans. The median income gap is $33,000. Okay, these disparities create an atmosphere of desperation. And once you combine this atmosphere of hopelessness and desperation with the archaic system of policing, what you've created is a ticking time bomb. These bombs have exploded in the form of uprisings in Ferguson, Missouri, Baltimore, and most recently back home in Minneapolis. All over, people of color have taken to the streets to say one thing, that our lives matter. Now, Governor, the Fed has played a direct role in the pain and suffering of these communities. By not fulfilling the mandate for full employment and not reinvesting resources into these communities, they have left people scrambling for hope, people who look just like me. What could the Federal Reserve do to fulfill this mandate, and what would you do through appointments to make sure that this is done?
Thank you. In all of the appointments that I would make, and in my history of being a mayor who had to assemble a cabinet and make appointments, and a governor who assembled a cabinet, you will see a long, consistent track record of appointing people who not only reflect the great strength of the diversity of our city, our state, our country, but also people who understand that we're all in this together, that share the same basic belief that we all do better, in Paul Wellstone's words, when we're all doing better. As in our state, we, for the first time ever, exceeded our goals for minority and women business procurement goals. We had the highest goals in the land, and we exceeded them in a recession, and then we raised those goals. I mentioned before that we had the second highest median income for African American families. We passed a living wage, we raised the minimum wage. We made it easier for people to bargain collectively and for better wages. I was reading on the way here, and I know you asked about the Federal Reserves. To the Federal Reserve, I would appoint people who understand that our economy is not money, it's people. It's all of our people. And therefore, we must, just like our parents and grandparents before us, take the actions that actually restore common sense wage and labor policies. No family that works hard for a living should have to raise their children in poverty. So we used to keep the minimum wage above the poverty line all the time. I believe that we got away from that in the 1980s with trickle-down economic. It's time to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, however we can, wherever we can. We need to raise the threshold to always pay overtime pay for overtime work again in our country. Because the way our economy grows is not from the trickling down from the top, is it? Have you ever seen a stalk of corn grow from the tassel down? That's not the way it happens. The more our workers earn, the more our workers spend, the more our economy grows. That's called American capitalism when it's right.
Let's go. Thank you. Governor, next we'll hear from Rekha Basu from the Des Moines Register. We have about a minute.
Hi, Governor O'Malley. Good to see you again.
Good
Thanks
to see
for
you
being here
again.
to answer our questions today. I'm going to shift gears for a minute and talk about foreign policy and ask you about a foreign policy issue. And this one is on a topic, a human rights situation that all too often goes ignored in our priorities, especially when we talk about the Middle East. And that is the fate of Palestinians who are living under Israeli occupation. It is clear that both Palestinians and Israelis have suffered from their fair share of violence. Yet with the Gaza blockade and military checkpoints and the destruction of farming and livelihoods and bombing campaigns, Palestinians are being forced to live as second-class citizens in their own land. Now, presidential candidates always pay tribute to our special relationship with Israel, which, as you know, comes with $3 billion in military aid every year, without mentioning the plight of Palestinians. My question is, under an O'Malley administration, would that aid and friendship be unconditional? And if not, what steps would Israel be required to take toward honoring calls for a Palestinian homeland?
I have visited the Middle East many times, and on a more recent visit, I visited not only and sat down with Mr. Netanyahu, but I also sat down with Mr. Fayyad in the Palestinian Authority. I am the only presidential candidate of either party to take the time to travel to Michigan about a couple months ago to address the American Arab Institute, and I was the first presidential candidate after Donald Trump's rather fascist remarks about American Muslims. To go to be in solidarity with my American Muslim neighbors at a mosque in Northern Virginia to express my solidarity and the better path forward for us as a nation. We are probably the only nation on the planet that has the ability to continue to call people back to a two-state solution. I believe very firmly that what is in the best security interests of the region, of Israel, and the United States is a two-state solution. And however elusive that may look, we need to have the hope as Americans to peer through the darkness and realize that a new day is always possible. I was very glad to have received the endorsement of StarPAC, and I know that many of their members also share concern for peace and dignity and respect for human rights in this very, very deep and long struggle. And to those who say that the time for a two-state solution has passed, I remember not too long ago people used to say the same thing about Northern Ireland. Catholics and Protestants, nationalists and loyalists have been fighting each other for so long that there was no way you could heal that 700-year-old wound. But with an American peace envoy, with a commitment to American principles, we were able to create a process for peace. I believe that America is best in this world when we are waging peace, and that is true in what I believe must be our unrelenting commitment to respect for human rights and the pursuit of a two-state solution, and actions consistent and not inconsistent with laying the groundwork for that.
Thank you, Governor.
And if you wouldn't mind just clarifying about the foreign aid piece of the question.
Yeah, and your question, look, I believe that, America's role in the world, and we are best when we exercise our powers consistently with our human values. And we need to call upon all of our allies in the world to respect those values. I mean, these are universal rights. And what we need, realizing how strong our relationship is with Israel, what a critical role we play, I do believe that we have the ability and the responsibility to bring people back to the table. I think your question is, will you cut off aid for Israel if... What I would say is this, is that the conditions or conditions for American aid should always be a commitment to universal values, of freedom from fear, freedom from want, freedom from oppression, the dignity of every person. We have made some pretty grave mistakes ourselves in the Middle East, going into Iraq when we never, ever should have gone into Iraq. And thinking that somehow that when a dictator falls, there's always a better day the next day. There's a lot of work that all of us need to do in the Middle East. And there's a lot of work we need to do in our relationship with Israel, and our relationship with other people of that area, and in our relationship with the people of the Palestinian Authority. When I met with Mr. Fayyad, I was struck by just how very much like most American mayors he was, in the respect that he just wanted to provide a better quality of life for his people. Wanted to show them that tomorrow could be better for their kids than today. And I think I think we need to dial up sustainable development, frankly, in all of this. I think that we should not wait until there's a global solution to an ancient problem before we lift up the lives of young people and poor people in the Palestinian Authority. That's what I believe.
So, Governor, I want to pick up on the previous question and go back to the first question, because you saw the resonance in the audience for those of us concerned about the plight of Palestinians. I think many of us would see what's happening in the Middle East as apartheid. I think many of us would still see what's happening in South Africa as apartheid. And some of us would also see what's happening in American cities as racial apartheid. And so I want to go back to your first question. It's sort of linked to the aid question, and ask you, how much domestic aid would you provide to deal with racial apartheid in American cities, and would you target it to the places most in distress?
Oh, yes. I mean, that's why I've come out with an agenda for a new agenda for American cities. I mean, my passion is America's cities. Some people look at America's cities and they see only the despair, the dichotomy, the great gulf between our promise as a nation and how short we come up on that. I see cities as places of tremendous opportunity to save lives, to redeem lives, to make lives better. And that's what I've dedicated my life too. I mean, so yes, the targeting of those transportation dollars, CDBG, all of that would be about addressing, look, growing injustices, structural unemployment, and in many cities, police brutality. None of these things go away by themselves. They require us to take these actions, and that's what we need to do. The good thing is that we've actually discovered in many places things that actually work to address these challenges. Some of them we started to do early on in the administration before we got saddled with this very unrepresentative House of Representatives, but we haven't done them at the scale that's necessary in order to actually address structural poverty. And on the issue of police brutality, there are things that we can do with greater openness and transparency that I've called for in a new agenda for criminal justice reform. Among them, requiring all departments to report just like they do the top 7 UCR crimes, lethal force, discourtesy, and excessive force, so that everyone can see whether we're doing any better this week than we were the same time last year.
Excellent. Thank you. Next up, we'll have Roshan Cofield from right here in Des Moines, Iowa. Roshan.
I greet you all in God's joy. My name is Roshan Cofield, and I'm a single parent of 4, and particularly a sole caregiver and provider for a special needs joy named Deshawn. Since arriving in Des Moines some 6 years ago, I've been in constant pursuit of my education. I'm standing here today with concerns with equal pay and affordable child care. I worked for an insurance company here in Des Moines for about 5 years, and while working there, I received less an hour than my white male and white female coworkers. After working at that company for 2 years, I received my first raise. It was 10 cents. I went from $14 an hour to $14.10 an hour. While I was working at the company, I was also receiving a subsidy for child care assistance while I was working towards my bachelor's degree. Well, that subsidy was reduced and ultimately discontinued because that 10 cents disqualified me and made me ineligible for child care assistance based off of child care guidelines. Lovingly, I meet the challenges of the emotional challenges of raising a child as special as Deshawn. With courage, I meet the academic challenges of being an adult learner frustratingly. I face the challenges of having to pay $185 a week for child care for a child, as well as meeting the basic needs for providing for my family. Governor, they tell me that if I get an education, I am guaranteed a good salary, a livable salary. My question to you today is, what are you going to do, and how are you going to make child care work for a person like me who desires only to make a better life for herself and her family?
Thank you. I believe that we need to be a lot more adept when it comes to raising thresholds in recognition of the fact that our economy is changing all the time, especially when it comes to things like basic, TANF support and child care. I work to increase child care investments in child care and protect them from cuts when I was governor, and as mayor, I certainly saw the impacts when another governor cut those things. So I believe that we need to do a lot better job on child care. I believe that we need to increase subsidies to child care, and we need to do it in such a way that it's tiered so that people don't find that they lose those supports if they, in fact, get a raise at work or if we raise the minimum wage. That's true kind of across the board. Nothing happens in isolation, right? It's an ecosystem. And sometimes, too often in our government, we have 2 speeds, on and off. And we're not adaptable enough and flexible enough to make sure that these supports are actually there to help people get on their feet, not a trapdoor to pull out from under. You touched a little bit on higher education. A lot of our people now have the worst of both worlds. They have a lot of debt, and they weren't able to hang in there because of starting a family or work changes in order to get the degree. And so they're paying a huge amount of debt, and they've struggled even to get back. We need to change and be much more flexible in higher education. The goal should not be the growth of the institutions. It should be in degree completion. We need to create more pathways for returning students to complete their coursework. We need to make greater use of online education. We need to make greater use of giving people the flexibility to demonstrate their competency, to earn the credits, and move ahead as they're ready. All of these things are part of my plan to move America to debt-free college within the next 5 years, greatly increasing Pell Grants and supports.
Governor, next we're going to hear from Barb Kalbaugh from Dexter, Iowa. Give Barb some love.
Hello, Governor. Often we hear from Washington that free trade must be a priority between the U.S. and her trading partners. It was free trade that brought us NAFTA in the 1990s, followed by CAFTA, and that's when my community began to change. My family and family farmers in our communities had, in the past, diversified operations, raising a variety of livestock and row crops, and we had bustling rural communities. With NAFTA and CAFTA, we began to see the consolidation of the farming industry. Corporate concentration continues to increase today. Diversified family farms face a system of monoculture as we watch the monopolizing of our seed, fertilizer, and herbicides, and even farmer-owned cooperatives. Livestock is largely raised in factory farms. We have over 9,000 of those in the state of Iowa today, and new ones built consistently. We are watching the slow death of our small towns. In spite of the drumbeat of free trade that we hear with the TPP, it will just bring more of the same. It will be NAFTA on steroids. How will your trade policies reverse the devastation brought to us by NAFTA and CAFTA? And what kind of trade policy will you champion that puts everyday people before corporate profits?
Yeah, thank you. Barbara, this is one of the great questions of our times. Woodrow Wilson used to say that economic freedom also means freedom from monopolies. We have moved to a point we haven't seen since the Gilded Age with the concentration of wealth and power and the consolidation of corporate power. You see it in the banking industry with Wall Street and 6 big banks controlling all of the 65% of assets there. And you see it in the resistance of some politicians to reinstituting Glass-Steagall. I'm in favor of a modern-day Glass-Steagall, and I'll tell you what else I'm in favor of. I believe that good trade deals for the United States of America are trade deals that actually raise standards for workers and raise standards for the environment. And trade deals that lower standards for workers and lower standards for the environment anywhere in the world are bad for the United States of America and the small towns of Iowa. So I am opposed to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And as an American, I think we should all be opposed to secret trade deals that our Congress has to vote on before we're even allowed to read them. Three weeks ago here in Iowa, I put forward 15 goals to restore the truth of the American dream that we share. Our economic system, I look at as an ecosystem. And nature knows that ecosystems achieve stability through diversity. Ideologues and fundamentalists believe the opposite. So one of the 15 strategic goals I've set for our country and the O'Malley administration, with your support, is to restore the guidance of fair competition to our antitrust enforcement laws. We've been looking the other way at these multinational consolidations, at the wiping out of family farms, at the concentration of corporate power, and we need to stop. Freedom, economic freedom, also means freedom from monopoly. And I intend to push back on these concentrations of power, whether it's in trade deals, or whether it's here in the United States, or these awful inversions that they should call evasions that need to be outlawed.
Next, Governor, we're going to hear from Gloria Coles from Minneapolis. Welcome, Gloria, to the mic, everybody.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gloria, and I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota. I am a mother, grandmother, educator, organizer, and a family caregiver. I cared for my mother for over 7 years before she passed away. Sometimes I neglected my own needs to focus on hers. During this time, I left my job to take care of her. And as a result, I lost my home to foreclosure. But if I had to do it again, I would. Many women like me, we step out of the traditional workforce to take care of our children and our family members. And because of this, we are punished. Sometimes because we are not earning wages, we are also not earning Social Security credits. Okay. Governor O'Malley. Governor, okay? Governor O'Malley. My question to you is this. Family caregivers such as myself, what solutions do you think will help us as we retire and we age?
All right.
Unlike the Republican candidates for President of the United States who want to privatize or cut Social Security, I believe that we need to expand Social Security and give proper credit to family caregiving. So that's what I put forward a plan that would actually increase average benefits paid out, and would also give credit to more often than not women who have to drop out of the so-called labor force when they're providing the critically needed labor of caring for a family member. My own mom raised all of us at home before she had to go back to work, or not had to, chose to go back to work. And so that's what I believe that we need to do. We need to modernize Social Security, not scrap it. And that's what I plan to do as president. It is on our website at martino'malley.com. I encourage you all to log on and check it out. And thank you for your question.
Next, Governor, we're going to hear from Gretchen Mowney from Missouri.
Hello, my name's Gretchen Mowney, and I'm from mid-Missouri, and I'm a leader with National People's Action. When I was a senior in college, I suddenly lost pretty much all my eyesight due to a rare genetic condition. At that time, I was unable to continue with school or work, and so I went on a number of government programs, including Medicaid and Medicare. Those programs allowed me to continue to get medication I needed and to see doctors while I learned to deal with my blindness. Since then, as an advocate and an organizer, I have met countless individuals in my state who don't have the health care they need, who can't afford, don't make enough to get health care through the Affordable Care Act, and who can't even get Medicaid because my state hasn't expanded it yet. Many of these people are suffering dearly, and 700 of them die every year. In states that have expanded Medicaid, like Iowa, they're planning to privatize it. And we know that's not what the people need. Healthcare is a human right. And shouldn't be treated as a privilege allotted to the lucky. Governor O'Malley, while healthcare is something that is needed for almost all aspects of life, from working at a job to caring for one's family, far too few people in our country have access to it. What are you going to do to fix this?
Thank you.
Hey, look, you underscored in your question one of the things that we still have to do, and that is to cover more of our people. There are a lot of people that are left out under the Affordable Care Act, and there's a lot of governors that are leaving their people out by clinging to ideology and refusing the Medicaid dollars. So we need to persuade them at the ballot box, and also by lifting up those examples of states that are actually making this work. As a governor, I had the responsibility to make the Affordable Care Act work as best as I could in my own state. We were able to cover an additional 1.4 million people with health care in my state, and half of those we covered even before the Affordable Care Act, and most of them were children. Look, it only makes sense. If people don't have coverage for the preventive care to keep their wellness in order, they're going to cost all of us more by waiting until they become so sick that they require hospital care or emergency room care. In our own state, thanks to the Affordable Care Act, we have moved all 46 of our acute care hospitals out of fee-for-service in an all-payer system where rates are set, and we have the big data to back it up, and instead now we pay the hospitals global payments for our Medicaid and Medicare patients. And last year, we drove down avoidable hospital room admissions by 11.5%, saved Medicaid $110 million. It's about access, yes, but it's also about reducing the needless institutional costs that make health care unaffordable so high in the United States. We're number one in that. There's another thing that we need to do, and it is this. I believe that the exclusion of as yet unnaturalized new American immigrants serves no good national purpose, and we should allow new American immigrants to sign up under the Affordable Care Act with subsidies.
Governor O'Malley.
I also would like to see us do more. I think we need to craft more products that cover those first out-of-pocket expenses, because a lot of people that do have the Affordable Care Act find they're paying out more than they were before.
Governor O'Malley, just a quick follow-up in 30 seconds to the core of Gretchen's question. As president, what would you do to expand health care?
Yeah, I would work with those governors, and I would lift up those models of states that actually work, and inform. I mean, part of what the President of the United States has to do is, look, understanding precedes action. And part of this is we have to make sure we lift up the best practices that are working in states, contrast how much better those states are doing on outcomes, on wellness, on their economy, compared to states that are turning away the Medicaid dollars, that are disadvantaging their citizens. And that's the great power that our office of President of the United States has. Let's lift up what's working, and let's also contrast it to the things that aren't. We don't have room for ideology in this world anymore. We need to do the things that work, that cover more people, and we need to lift those up, support governors that are doing those things, and cajole, persuade, and especially inform the voting public in those states where governors are holding their citizens at a disadvantage.
Thank you. Next, we will hear from Montega Simmons from St. Louis. Give Montega some love.
Family. My name is Montega Simmons. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, and with the Organization for Black Struggle. My story is rooted in the South. where my parents grew up in Mississippi and escaped communities that were embedded in violence, lynchings, Jim Crow, and poverty in search of opportunity and safety in St. Louis. They just happened to arrive at a time when a plan was being enacted to extract resources from the people of that city. In the wake of urban uprisings in the 60s, cities around the country turned to urban planners to help them develop their own urban strategies to move Black folks out of those cities. In St. Louis, this strategy became known as the Team 4 Plan. A place like Chicago was Weisberg. You already know what happened on the east side to Blacks for the last 40 years and how they were displaced and under-resourced. It was in this footprint that I first experienced criminalization and police harassment just for walking back and forth to school. It was in this same footprint that would eventually result in the murder of Mike Brown Jr. This was an explicit policy decision by local Democratic politicians. That contributed to the chronic poverty, police violence, high unemployment, poor schools, and lack of health care that continues to plague Black communities in St. Louis and cities throughout this country to this day. What commitments can you make to redirect funding from our dysfunctional criminal justice system into systems that create opportunities for communities of color? Are you willing to force the divestment of federal dollars from the militarization of local police forces and invest in the health and financial stability of our communities?
Yeah, there's a need for us to up our preparedness and homeland security, but there's not a need for the militarization of small local police forces. And I think we need to rein in. I think we need to rein in that program. As mayor of Baltimore, as governor, I was on a constant search for 15 years for the things that work, so that we could do more of them to save and redeem lives, and for the things that don't work, so we could stop doing them and stop wasting money on them. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the fact that we greatly increased drug treatment, and that was a huge help in bringing down crime and making our communities safer. I'm talking about the investments I already touched on before, actually increasing education investments. But there were some things that we also learned that worked, and we expanded them. Reentry programs in our prisons. When you expand those things, they actually work. We drove down our recidivism rate by 15% over the 8 years of the recession, which I do believe is the largest reduction of any state in America. By the time I was done as governor, we had not only reduced violent crime to 30-year lows, we reduced our incarceration rate to 20-year lows. In my first 52 days in office, I shut down the largest, most violent, and notorious prison, the House of Corrections in Jessup. Memo to future executives, it's always easier to do it first rather than ask the legislature for permission. I also learned in policing the police. You know, when I ran for mayor of Baltimore, and still to today, Baltimore's a majority African-American city, I was running as a minority mayor, and our issue was, how are we going to improve public safety and police responsiveness? Because in our city, the story was in every neighborhood, if you called from a wealthier neighborhood, black or white, the police always came and they always got out of their car. But if you called from a poorer neighborhood, the vast majority of which were black, they hardly ever came and they hardly ever got out of their car. And so we had to not only improve police responsiveness, we had to improve the way we police the police. We affirmatively recruited the largest numbers in terms of the diversity of the force. I gave the Civilian Review Board, fully staffed it for the first time with its own 2 independent detectives. We started doing 100 reverse integrity stings a year, and when officers failed, we were front and center announcing the failure so that people had the trust that we were actually doing what we say when it comes to policing our police. And I also, not the first try, not the second try, but the third try, became the first governor south of the Mason-Dixon line to repeal the death penalty, which doesn't work, is unjust, and takes money away from other things.
Governor O'Malley, I want to follow up on the question about the criminal justice system to talk about the broken immigration system. And you just mentioned executive action. What we do know is this administration, through executive action, has deported more immigrants than any other administration in modern times, including over the last several weeks during the holiday season. How will you fix our broken immigration system and to keep it 100, as they say? Distinguish your plan to fix our broken immigration system from our two other Democratic candidates for president.
Gotcha. Jorge Ramos has said that I have put forward the most comprehensive and progressive immigration reform plan of any of the candidates running for president. I truly believe that these mindless deportation policies, I said earlier that sometimes in government, I've learned this as an executive, as a modern leader, taking over some pretty moribund organizations and making them perform at higher levels, creating feedback loops so we know what's going on. I don't believe those feedback loops exist where ICE is concerned. And I believe that we need to stop these mindless deportation policies that are ripping families apart for absolutely no national good. I also believe that we need to shut down these shameful for-profit prisons that are proliferating all over our country. I also believe that it is a national shame that we, the people of the United States of America, maintain the largest system of immigrant detention camps in the world, and we need to get away from those and shut those down. I also believe that it is inconsistent with our principles as a free people, as a nation of nations and as a nation of immigrants, that we would ever shut our doors on refugee families, whether they're fleeing genocide in Syria or death gangs in Central America. And let us not forget this. Let us not forget this, that this announcement came at Christmas time. Jesus himself was a refugee child fleeing death gangs at Christmas time. I was the first candidate, and let us hope not the last, to call upon the Secretary of Homeland Security to reverse these cruel and inhumane policies and use his statutory power to extend temporary protective status to those Central American refugee kids who have come here. And 2 years ago, when the Central American refugee kids were coming here, there were some governors in the United States, one of whom even used the phrase, he said, "I hear there might be in my state. I'm going to find out where these rascals are and round them up." Like they were a pack of swarming jackrabbits instead of children with the same human dignity your children and my children have. We took a different course in Maryland. We took a different course. I brought together people collaboratively, faith leaders from across the spectrum, and we accommodated 5,000 kids, more than any other state in America, in foster homes, not in detention camps. So in conclusion, what distinguishes me from the other candidates in this race? I've been consistent. I don't say to one group that I'm in favor of building more walls, and to another group I then use the term New Americans. I have always used the term New Americans. I have always kept a sign on my desk as mayor and governor from the 1880s when my great-grandfather came here that reads, "Help wanted, no Irish need apply." We were all once strangers in a strange land. I was for driver's licenses and fought for driver's licenses for new American immigrants. I passed the DREAM Act in my state and defended it at the ballot. And I do not believe that new American immigrants take our jobs. No. New American immigrants make America stronger. It's what makes America, America. And so in conclusion,
I got one more question.
let me say, to that immigrant-bashing, carnival barker Donald Trump, that our enduring symbol of the United States is not the barbed wire fence, it is the Statue of Liberty.
I think, Governor, I think you're warmed up, and I think the crowd is warmed up, and it's a shame because we only have one last question for you. Our final question will be from our good friend, George Zornick from The Nation magazine. Give George some love.
I was kind of waiting for the organ music to start.
Governor, thank you for being here. You're a tough act to follow, apparently. But I have a question. So as you know, the unemployment data that came out on Friday showed that while the overall unemployment rate was holding firm at 5%, the unemployment rate for African Americans is at 8.3%, and for Hispanic non-whites was at 6.3%. So we've heard from you today a lot of policies that you would suggest to try to close this gap. And in fact, policies to do that have existed for some time. But there's obviously a political problem here, where I think it's fair to say that if the national rate, not just the black unemployment rate, but the national rate was 8.3%, we would see a sense of urgency from both parties that we do not see right now. So as president, how would you get around that political problem, create that sense of urgency, and fix a federal policymaking process that doesn't seem well attuned to addressing this problem?
Yeah, great question. And this is... You know, everywhere I go across our country and across Iowa, and I've now visited some 65 counties, engaging with my neighbors and talk about the future of the story that we share. The question comes up consistently every single town: what are you going to do to work with this really divided national politics we face in our Congress? It is one of the deepest questions that we have to ask ourselves as Americans. Look, I don't have a way to go around it. I don't have a way to go over it or under it or hit an easy button. And what I do suggest to people that have the weighty decision that all of you have to make as Iowans in this Democratic caucus is which of the three of us offering our candidacies has the best chance at healing these divides, at bringing us together, at restoring what de Tocqueville called the strength of our soft bonds. I'm not a divider. I never have been a divider. In fact, my background, my experience in Baltimore over some very deep racial and class divides was bringing people together over the toughest of issues. My experiences as governor, passing a living wage, repealing the death penalty, passing marriage equality. You know, those last two only got done with some Republican votes. I felt I had a responsibility to get to know the Republican members of our legislature just as well as I knew the Democratic members of our legislature. This is something that we need to work on together. But this is something where presidential leadership is critically important. I would never say that all Republicans are my enemies. That's not how you get things done. Republicans aren't our enemies. They're our colleagues at work. They're our friends. They're our uncles, right? We've got to figure this out, but this much I do know. I do know that where there is no vision, it's very hard to bring people together. That's why I've been clear about laying out 15 strategic goals for our country, cutting youth unemployment in half in the next 3 years, getting wages to go up again for all Americans. We have to remember that we're all in this together. Some of the policies that I've articulated here, you can say we've had them forever, but we stopped using them. In the economy our parents and grandparents created, for those 40 years, everybody moved up. Everybody took steps forward. In the economy that came after Ronald Reagan and the implementation of trickle-down economics, only the highest percent moved forward. Poorest families started moving back. And look, when a nation reaches a point where wealth and power are so concentrated in the hands of so few that it's taking opportunity out of the hands of the many, there's only two paths and only two forward. One of them is a sensible rebalancing based on our common good that restores that concrete promise that wherever you start, you can get ahead. So we mentioned some of those policies, minimum wage and equal pay for equal work for men and women. The other path is pitchforks or rocks. I believe in a sensible rebalancing. I believe that President Obama has done good work to restore our economy, and we have to build on his legacy now and make wages go up now that our country is creating more jobs. And I also believe that there is nothing so divided about our national politics that it cannot be solved with new leadership and with the love that we have for one another. We are a great people. We've been through divided times before. Expectations become behavior. You and I must expect that our country will become better and make herself better, because no people ever gave their children a better future by making their country weaker. That's why I'm running for president. I believe I'm the only person in either party that can heal these wounds and move us forward in these times. And I need your help on caucus night. Thanks very, very much.
Thank you, Governor O'Malley. Join me in thanking Governor Martin O'Malley.
Thanks a lot.